Welcome to the Might in Motion podcast, where we empower leaders like you to navigate both their personal and professional journeys. Are you a manager hungry to reshape the course of your career? I'm your host, Mariana Kinney, and for the past 24 years, I've been a Fortune 50 leader, absorbing invaluable lessons from industry luminaries on how to break free from limiting beliefs and habits. On the Might in Motion podcast, our compass is guided by the 4 M's: motivation, momentum, mindfulness, and might. Each episode, we dive into conversations with leaders from Fortune companies, doctors, and entrepreneurs. Their stories, their might in motion, will not just captivate you, but ignite the spark within. Join us as we unravel the secrets to success, providing you with the inspiration to craft your own action plan and prepare yourself towards your goals. This is your journey, your might in motion. Welcome to the podcast that fuels your aspirations. Welcome to Might in Motion. Today's episode is sponsored by Pantheon FM. Are you struggling to get a constant flow of clients? Meet the Pantheon. It's an exclusive network of entrepreneurs changing the world through entrepreneurship. Sell more of your high-ticket programs by becoming an icon in your industry who rallies together in what we call the Pantheon. For more information, contact me directly, Mariana Kinney, your host of today's episode. Today, I am very excited to welcome Lisa DeAngelis, a holistic change practitioner, author, teacher, and speaker. She is passionate about building meaningful relationships and helping others live authentically. Her debut book, Embracing the Unknown, Exploring the Pathways to Change, offers research, wisdom, and aspirational stories that will empower and support others in learning to navigate change in their own lives. Lisa's unfolding journey has established her commitment to living with intention and purpose and helping others. I am very excited. Lisa, welcome to Might in Motion.
Hello. I'm so happy to be here. Thank you so much for having me.
We connected, it's been about a month, and we both said, my gosh, in 4 or 5 weeks, so much has happened. And I mean, your specialty is change. And I'll tell you, I don't know what's in the stars lately, but there has been a ton of change going on in this world.
There absolutely has. There absolutely has. The funny thing is, change is one of those things that's really always happening. It's always going on around us. I just think we get in cycles and flows where we recognize we can jump in and ride that wave really differently every once in a while. And there are definitely some periods in time where it feels like we are having to work really hard to take one step and then another and then another and then another. And I think in those moments, that's when we go, oh gosh, change. It's so hard. It's so aggressive. It's so, it's so invasive in my life. But then there are other times where we just sort of think, oh yeah, things are changing. I'm changing. We're all moving. Here it's moving. And then it all of a sudden feels like it has a different, almost creative, generative energy behind it. And I think that's a little bit of what you and I think, but people are picking up on right now.
Yeah.
It's just a little bit of that creative, generative, changeful time that I find really exciting because, yes, I'm a little bit of a geek about change.
Why do you think so many change is hard for so many people? And, a lot of people who listen to this podcast are in that corporate space. And that's kind of one of our mantras at work. We would say, oh, the only thing that's constant is change, right? Why do you think some people resonate with it and others just, it's a challenge?
Yeah, it's such a tricky question. I think on one hand, of course, there are a ton of barriers to change, right? There are just physical reasons why it's hard. Doing things different asks us to move into spaces we don't know, and that can be really, really unnerving. And so I think that's a big piece of it. Is change is hard because of that. The other piece about change that I think is really fascinating is it asks us to look into who we are, ask questions about our identity. And
Mhm.
sometimes as we change, we have to actually challenge who we've been so we can become who we want to be in the next
Mhm.
iteration, with what change looks like as we carry it out. And that can be a little bit more of a sticky process if we're somebody that goes, oh my gosh, who am I? What do I actually want to do? And those are the questions that can be interesting, but sometimes difficult because it forces us to stop and say,
Mhm.
wait, what do I actually want here?
Yeah, and if you think about it, and I heard it on another podcast I was listening to earlier this week, actually, so it's very timely. But they talked about how where you are now, the person you are right now, was
Mhm.
because the person X number of years ago made a change.
Yes.
And you're not who you were a year ago. You're somebody different. And what you're doing now is going to create another iteration of yourself in the future that's not who you are now.
Absolutely. And in my personal journey, I spent so many years trying to drill down and define the exact pieces of who I was. I am loyal. I am dependable. I am efficient. And yes, I'm still all those things, but one of the pieces of change freedom, I'll call it, right, is the recognition that I can be all of those things. I can be
Mm,
really efficient and also take time off and rest. I can be really, really dependable and also a clear communicator when I can't follow through. And it doesn't make that a judgment on me as a person. It just allows there to be a little bit more space to play with it. And I think that was a really interesting space for me, spending so much time going, I have to define who I am. And now it's sort of like, how can I lean into who I'm becoming right now? And
mm,
let those versions of me shine a little bit more. It's sort
yeah.
of like if you have a gem or something like that, you turn it and the facets reflect the light just a little bit differently. And I'm starting to think of identity and the way we show up in the world a little bit more like that. It's sort of like, what do I want to polish? What do I want to hone in on at this point? And then what helps me take myself to the next place I want to go? And that's often a big question, obviously, in careers, in our personal lives, in what we have going on. Organizations just tend to have a lot of preset paths to walk, right?
Yeah.
There's a lot of systems, there's a lot of structures, there's a lot of all of that stuff in place. But when it comes to us, it's sort of like the sky's the limit. And that's amazing. And oh my gosh, the sky's the limit. So where the heck do I even start?
Yeah, I mean, that I think is probably one of the hard parts for people. How do you help people either figure out how to navigate change or know that
Mhm.
they know they want to do something different. They know they want to start that journey. How do you help them break free and do that?
Sure. Well, I think the first thing is actually looking at what are the barriers. And
Mhm.
that could be something we cross over because people are often thinking, "Well, I just want to get there. It doesn't matter what's happened in the past. I just want to go there." But it's really important to know what kind of habits, what kind of systems and structures internally we have in place that might be actually preventing us from holding ourselves back. I
Mm,
mean, speaking of this identity piece just a little bit further, a lot of us have some really interesting limiting beliefs that we may not even be aware of that drive our decision making. And until we can shine a little bit of light on those blind spots, it becomes very difficult to make those changes because it's all we know. It's
yeah.
all our system knows. So, first step for me is always identify the barriers, identify the reasons it might, could, or is already difficult to be moving in a different direction. And then really start to develop some tools and resources that people can utilize to move forward. And my favorite tools for change are adaptability, resilience, and courage. And
Mhm.
these don't necessarily seem like really active tools, but I consider them foundational in the world of change because all of the process of doing things we have not done before involves moving outside our comfort zone, going to places we have not been, trying on versions of ourselves we haven't yet tried on, and that can be a little uncomfortable at first. And so if we're really drawn into these places of, I can only do what's comfortable, I can only do what my habits are, I can only stay within, solidly within this space of what I already know, it's really, really difficult to even imagine what's up ahead, let alone start to take those steps.
Yeah, that makes a ton of sense. And
Mhm.
it's not necessarily playing the part, right, that you want it to be, but you have to be able to start envisioning what does that look like? What does that feel like? So that you can start making choices that make it reality.
Absolutely, and normalize the fact that absolutely no one's path is linear. We
Yes.
see point A to point B, and hindsight is absolutely 20/20, and things look a lot straighter looking back. But
Right.
there are so many, it's one of those situations where if you zoom in, there are so many ups and downs, many ups and downs that happen that it really we need to normalize and remind ourselves, this is not a one-way street where we start here and then, 3 months from now and we've had no bumps along the
Right.
way. And that's when these ideas come in. We have to stay adaptable. We have to stay resilient. We have to really utilize courage, which, is a funny word. People have used the word brave to describe me, and I always would think, I'm not brave. I don't do big, crazy, I'm not that brave. But I realized that what they saw in me that I didn't necessarily identify in myself was the willingness to consistently put myself into situations that were outside my comfort zone.
Yep.
And that takes courage. It
Mm-hmm.
really does, because there is a lot of fear that goes along with moving into spaces that we're unfamiliar with. So I think it's really interesting when we look at all of these tools that we can use and remind ourselves that they aren't things we have to go out and find. We all have adaptability, resilience, and courage to some level. For some people, it's stronger. For some people, it's closer to the surface and a little easier to call on in moments where we might need it, but we've got it. It's just a matter of reconnecting with those tools and really saying, okay, now how do I want to use this tool to help me in my next step moving forward?
Yeah, that makes so much sense to me. I mean, as I look back on my career, that's kind of known as every three to 4 years, I would move to a completely different team that I knew nothing
Mhm.
about. And I always said, well, it's because I'm an Aquarius. But really, it's just because I just wanted to be uncomfortable, right?
Mm.
And
Mhm.
hey, here I can go learn something new. I can take the things I do know, bring it to the team, and be an asset to the team because I'm bringing something, knowledge, skill set, connections, network, whatever you want to call it, to that team that didn't have it. But man, I get to be uncomfortable too, which means I get to learn from others and I get to grow and I get to expand.
I love that. And clearly your capacity for being in those uncomfortable spaces is big, right? And I've met some people who will say, "Oh, I just can't do that." I don't have the ability to do that. But it's a muscle.
Yeah.
It takes practice, and it is something that grows. So one of the exercises sometimes I'll encourage people to do is actually map out your comfort with leaving your comfort zone. Notice
Mm,
what it feels like, right? Because we have our comfort zone, and then most people recognize the panic zone, which is freak out mode, right? Like they go from comfort to panic. All of a sudden they're, point A, and then like, I have to run back because I'm panicked. It's overwhelming. It's too much. I can't do it. But there is a space in the middle, and I call it the stretch zone, right? So it's
mm,
like we leave our comfort zone and we move into the stretch zone. The stretch zone is really where a lot of learning and growth happens. When we're in panicked mode, there's not actually a lot of learning and growth that can happen because our system is
survival.
worried. It's yes, exactly. It's worried, it's freaking out, and it needs to get us back to a place where we're more stable. So in that stretch zone is really where that change starts to happen. And yes, sometimes the stretch zone is super, super narrow. And I'll joke with people, that are trying to do something new for the first time. No one goes out and runs a marathon day one.
Right.
Sometimes for people who really struggle with even getting out and doing something physical, you just have to put your shoes on and leave the house and then come
Mhm.
back in. And then do that for a couple days. And that is what's increasing your stretch zone. Maybe you go around the block, maybe you go around the block twice. That is your capacity for stretch over time. And
Mhm.
you look back and realize with time and experience how much you've achieved, where you've been able to go. It may not even be something you imagined was possible before. So sometimes it's a fun exercise to say, where are the edges? Where do I
Mm.
go from comfort to all of a sudden like, ooh, I'm stretched, but this is kind of fun. This is kind of interesting. I'm learning something new. And most people know when they've reached their panic zone, right? And so if you're someone who goes really quickly to panicked, maybe back up a little bit and just say, okay, what really took me over that edge? And how can I just stay in for a minute or two longer in this stretch space and say to my system, we're just stretching. What happens if we're just stretching right now? And then we'll go back to the comfort zone, right? We'll do this. And it's a fluid process. We're never only in one. We always are sort of moving through the other. But over time, when we have the ability to stretch this capacity for stretch, it really leads us into the space where we can live with and in change in a totally different way. Because all of a sudden it becomes an exploration, an exciting experimentation, instead of we're really close to being pushed over the edge.
Yeah, that is awesome. Now, one of the things we talked about a few weeks ago when we met was something I found really interesting. And
Yeah.
you talked about proof loops and how
Mm-hmm.
that helps people get through their fear. And,
Yes.
I really want you to share that and what proof loops are, right? Because I think it's something that could be really relevant in all aspects of your life, career, home,
Yes.
etc.
Yeah, thanks for bringing that up. I'll back up like just a little bit because I think another piece about change that's super important to recognize is it's absolutely a process that absolutely works in cycles. So it's really difficult if we don't realize that we have to take moments to stop, to pause, to reorient ourselves, to reassess the situation, and then notice what's happening next and make new choices. We're never constantly stuck in one direction. And I think that's very important to remind uh, people about the process is that it's a total cycle. So this proof loop kind of works in conjunction with that because I think one of the challenges and mistakes maybe people make when they're trying to navigate the process of change is they forget to stop and actually click in what's happened, actually give their system proof. So, in that example I was just using about something you've done that you hadn't yet done before that stretches you a little bit, if you just gloss right over that, your system's sort of going to go, oh, yeah, maybe I did it. But then the next time something happens, it's just going to go, oh gosh, I've never done this before. But if you take the time to establish what I call a proof loop, right, is to say, oh, I actually did that. So it's not that I can't do hard things. It's not that I can't do things I've never done before. Oh, now I'm remembering there's that moment where I get really uncomfortable. And then there's that moment that I think to myself, wait, is this the thing I really want to do? And then I try it. And then I say, oh, yes, that is actually what I want to do. And I think the biggest part of this proof loop is celebrating it, is actually
Mm,
saying, I did that.
yep.
And as silly
Yeah.
as that sounds, it's really important to the wiring in of the brain because as I believe you know, I think we talked just a little bit about this. The brain actually works on predictive cycles of things that have happened in the past. The brain balances the predictive cycles of the past experiences we've had with what's happening in our systems, our body budget. And I'm taking this from the work of Dr. Lisa Feldman Barrett, who wrote a lovely book about how the brain works on emotions. And she really talks about the fact that if the prediction our brain makes is not correct, it will correct itself. It's sort of
Mm,
like our brain runs a little proof loop to go like, was that the
yeah.
right thing? Oh yeah, it was. Okay, we're going to store that for next time. So we're doing that at a more conscious level when we go through these processes in our life and say, "Oh my gosh, that was really hard, but I did it." I'm not actually sure if I liked that, but that was great that I had that experience because now I know what it feels like. It's kind of the same as if you interview for a job you don't really actually want, but you have a really positive experience in the
Yeah.
interview because you learned something about yourself. And maybe you didn't know you didn't want the job until you finished the interview or you got into the room, which is an
Yep.
important, it doesn't really matter what that distinction is. But those things are not unvaluable to changing just because they weren't exactly what you wanted. There's
Right.
still a lot of positive benefit from really wiring in, like, ooh, now I'm closer to actually understanding what I want. I have more clarity. There's a little bit more discernment in my system to say, oh, yeah, now this is feeling like something that really fits who I am and what I want to do.
That I love that, and your commentary on having an interview and realizing you don't want it. You got to tune into that. As women, sometimes we lessen our intuition, but our intuition is as you start tuning it, it becomes better and better, right? And that goes back to a change, like that change, right? And that you were talking about how you've got the stretch zone and the panic zone and that sort of thing. As there's so much intuition that you can have that actually fits into those zones. That is telling
Yes.
you, like, you know what, this stretch is good. This stretch is you're about to break. You need to panic.
Totally. And anecdotally, I can just share with you, I remember very distinctly one of my own interviews for a job I was going to. And I did really want the job. But I remember having a moment before I walked in and saying to myself, okay, Lisa, this is a mutual interview. You have
Mhm.
to like them just as much as you want them to like you. You need to be listening to the inputs that you're receiving because you actually do have the choice about whether this is the right next step for you. And that felt like a really important moment for me in sort of regaining a little bit of sovereignty, entitlement, whatever you want to call
It's
it,
empowerment.
over my next step. Empowerment. Yeah,
Mhm.
absolutely. Because I wasn't just sitting there going, oh, please give me this job. And I'm just going to wait around and see if it happens the way you think it should go. I really walked in thinking, okay, I want to make sure this is actually a fit. And what about it is good for me? And I think that layer of important permission for myself was a moment of saying, you do have choice here, even though this is a situation that sometimes other people can say it's up to them. They're going to
Yeah.
decide who they hire. I think there is a difference there if we approach these situations saying, you do have the ability to say, yes, this is something I really want, or actually, this is not for me.
Yeah. A lot of times when we're going through change and we've got goals that we want to go after, which requires us to grow and get uncomfortable, that makes other people in our lives uncomfortable, right? Because
Mhm.
now we're changing and maybe leaving them behind, or we're not who we used to be. Well, I don't want to be who I used to be. I want to be the better version of who I used to be, right? What do you think people can do to either get over it or maybe help others understand that this change journey isn't about them, it's about us as the individual?
You bring up such a great point. I bring this topic up in a section of my book. I talk about some of the barriers to changing, and I reference it in the mode of what was considered tribal shaming. And this is what
Mm,
happened: is if someone threatened the health or safety of the tribe, they were really chastised because the whole system depended on everyone staying exactly where they were and keeping their part, right? Fulfilling their role, which sometimes was really limited. But fascinatingly enough, nothing would have ever changed in our cultural everything. I'm sorry, one second. In our cultural everything, if no one moved out of their comfort zone to make a change.
yeah.
And so it's really, really fascinating that unfortunately there does tend to be some grief that pops up
Mm,
because people sometimes do have to make difficult choices about what needs to be left behind in order for them to move forward. Sometimes
right.
that's an internal process, right? Sometimes it's I have to recognize that I'm not the person I used to be and I liked the person I used to be but I don't have the ability or the desire to really fulfill that anymore. And sometimes it is sitting down and having a really serious conversation to just say, this is important to me and this is why.
Yeah.
And me changing doesn't have to change who we are. And I
Yeah.
think that's something that other people sometimes don't understand about the process of change is just because someone is changing an aspect of who they are doesn't mean that the way they show up in the world has to be completely different. And so I think it's a really delicate balance. And I have a lot of compassion for that layer of change, which really is difficult in the sense that sometimes we have to lose things in order to move forward and grow. But it's that fascinating paradox, every ending is actually a beginning if we allow it to be.
So usually I ask people, if you go back 5 years, Lisa, what would you tell that yourself 5 years ago? I'm going to flip it a little bit. What would you want to tell yourself 5 years in the future?
What would I tell myself 5 years in the future? Oh, that is really interesting. Honestly, at this exact moment, I would say I have no idea what you're planning, but you have really pulled me through the ringer. So I am now excited and curious because I can't see how all this stuff is going to come together, but I do trust that it
Mm,
will, because time and time again, I can't always see the big picture. And yet, when I step back, all of a sudden it makes total sense. So I'm going to say, I hope you know what you're doing, because I feel like I'm on quite a ride and I'm here for it. I trust you, but
yeah.
I hope you know what you're doing.
Well, now we know you have a marker in time. So when you fast forward and it's 2029, God, I can't believe it's going to be
Oh
2029.
gosh, that's a little scary.
Right. So it's 2029, right? You now have a marker forever to be like, okay, I look back. Yeah, you're right. That was an amazing 5 year journey. I love that. I love that you're trusting your future self, that she knows what she's doing.
Yeah, because like I said, sometimes I certainly feel like I don't. And it is harkens back a little bit, I think, to this intuition piece, is
Yeah.
we don't always have to know exactly why. There have been some people I have felt drawn to, some jobs that I have had that I thought at the time, I have no idea why this feels important to me. But
Mm,
I've learned something really important through each of those things that sometimes just needs to be thrown into the mix, right? Simmer for a while. And then we never know, and it's going to be able to be called back up.
yeah.
So I think it's one of those, no experience is really lost. And the more that we can recognize that, even if we can't see the bigger picture in the moment, it is important to recognize that if we feel pulled towards something, then it is probably important for us to follow that through.
Yeah. I
Yeah.
love it. I love it. I
Yeah.
love it. So if people are interested in getting to know you, getting to know what you do a little bit more, what's the best place for people to go? I know we're going to have all your links in the notes, but I always like to call out, what's that one place that people should go to connect with you?
Yeah, my website is probably the best, which is listed up here. It's just my name, lisadeangelis.com. And that's probably the best hub way to sort of get in touch with what I have and what's going on. I'm sorry, there's a fire truck going by.
Hey,
I don't
it's
know if
New
you
York.
can.
It's okay.
I live in New York City. Yes, here we are. My website is probably the best. Obviously, there is a link to my book, which can be found on my website as well. I'll do a little shameless. I've got yours and mine here. So I've got a little might in motion action, and I've got a little embracing the unknown action here. So yeah, I'd love for you to check it out and connect with me. Let me know what you think, what resonates with you.
So I took down notes. And so I want to share some of my golden nuggets from today with the audience. So there are barriers to change, and which is why sometimes people find it hard to actually move. It's the unknown. And you really have to be able to break through that unknown. You've got to ask yourself, who are we? Who do we have to become to move with that change? And to navigate it, number one, you got to look at your barriers. What are those habits, those systems, those processes that you have in place that might be preventing you from moving forward? And then two, develop the tools and resources to actually make that move. And you mentioned adaptability, resiliency, and courage. and that there is no linear paths. And when I think of resiliency, I think of a rubber band, right? And as you pull the rubber band, you can move it into different shapes and all that. And you've got that stretch zone, which you mentioned, which also resonated with me with that rubber band visual, right? That's going to tell you, if you listen to yourself, you listen to your intuition, you'll know when that stretch becomes more of a panic. And then you can kind of pull right back a little bit, but not all the way, and continue until now you've created a new comfort zone to be able to move out of. That you also talked about that change is actually freedom, and it allows you to embrace who you are without judgment. And you use that visual of, if you're looking at a gem, you're looking at a diamond, right? And as you rotate it, you move it, you're getting different angles, sides, finishes, etc. And it's going to allow you to be able to look at that reflection differently. To do that too, you've got the proof loops, which I just love that term. It just makes me happy. I don't know why, but the proof loops allow you to stop, reflect on what you've accomplished, take that W, right? We always talk about wins, losses, right? Take that W. That tells your mind that change, that progress you're making is actually normal and it's a good thing. So that when it happens again, your brain is like, okay, cool. Oh, and then next one, okay, even better, because it's becoming the new habit, that new routine, that new system when you're celebrating that W, that win. And then even though you may have people around you that may you may feel like they're pulling you back, but it's that tribal shaming that you mentioned, where there's a grief process. You may be grieving the old you, but so might other people. And that you can reiterate that when you yourself are changing does not mean that that relationship has to necessarily change, right? So, and then finally, when you're talking to your future self that you don't know, but you're going to lean into it and you're going to trust your future self that she has that vision. And that's such a beautiful, just so beautiful to me, because sometimes we don't trust ourselves in the present. And I love that you're actually trusting yourself in the future, which is just really, really cool. And I think more of us need to do that, both in the present and the future, because we know, deep down, we know. And once you start doing that, it allows you to really, really grow. So that was my recap.
Amazing. That was an amazing recap. And I think, for me, like the biggest thing is like continuously showing up, continuously starting, continuously making choices that you can then just say, oh, was that the right choice for me? I don't know. I think the starting is what really stops people sometimes, stops people up. And, it's just showing up is enough. And starting is the first step, even if it doesn't seem like it. So
I love it.
Here's to change.
Yeah. I think everyone should check out your book. Once again, it's Embracing the Unknown, Exploring the Pathways to Change. Very excited about it. And, thank you. Thank you, Lisa, for joining us today, sharing your message. It's just really, really cool stuff. And I love the conversation.
Thank you. This was lovely.
Thank you for joining us on another insightful episode of Might in Motion. Your time and commitment to personal and professional growth is truly appreciated. As you continue your journey, remember the power lies within you. Apply the wisdom shared by our incredible guests. Harness the 4 M's: motivation, momentum, mindfulness, and might, and make your path towards success uniquely yours. If you found today's episode valuable, don't forget to subscribe, rate, and leave a review. Your feedback fuels our mission to empower leaders like you. Stay inspired, stay motivated, and always keep your might in motion. Until next time, this is Mariana Kinney signing off, wishing you boundless success on your journey ahead.